We are back with another How to Succeed podcast. This is how to succeed at being a corporate athlete. What does that mean? We're going to ask Robin Green, a longtime Sandler trainer from Richmond, Virginia. As always, I'm Mike Montague, your host and MC and Director of Community Engagement at Sandler as well. For more information, go to sandler.com. The following podcast copyrighted by Sandler Systems, Inc., protected by U.S. copyright laws. And if you don't know who Sandler is, we're the worldwide leader in sales management and customer service training. And you can subscribe to this podcast, iTunes, Google Play, wherever you're listening and watching it right now would be great. And if you're watching it live, you can join in the comments and participate live too. So don't hesitate to pop something into LinkedIn or YouTube, make a comment, and we'll be happy to have you join the discussion. All right, Robin, welcome to the podcast. This is your first time on the podcast. We've been doing the show for 8 years. You've been in Sandler for 8 years. I can't believe it's taken this long, but I'm excited to talk to you about being a corporate athlete. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, first of all, Mike, thanks for having me on. As I said during the green room discussion, longtime listener, first-time caller. Really enjoy.
Love your show, Rob.
Well, I really do enjoy the How to Succeed podcast. I'm glad to be on it. So, the thing that, and this all born out of work that I've done with clients. But if I go back, when I was in graduate school, a little bit of my story. I studied sports psychology, and for a moment, I thought about making that my profession. Like, I've always had an interest in helping people perform at a higher level and figuring out why do some people do well, even when maybe they have less raw talent. And so I ended up going into coaching instead of the academic route. And so I worked as a college baseball coach for a number of years before moving into the business world. And when I got into sales, I quickly realized that there were things that I did as an athlete, and there were concepts that I used as a coach that were quite similar. It was a very different context, but it was very comforting for me to know that, a lot of the lessons that I needed to be successful in business, I already knew from my world of athletics. And so,
yeah.
I think just to sort of summarize, why we're talking about this today, I think it's important with organizations. I think it's important that performers understand how to become their own best coach. And so there are things that we learn and we observe and we watch from our athletic pursuits, either from the past or from watching our favorite team and our favorite athletes, that you can bring into sales. And so what we're going to talk about today, Mike, is just some of the things that we can pull from athletics and really start to think about ourselves as a corporate athlete. How do we show up and be our best every single day? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love it. And I think it brings us right to attitude, so we can jump into it. I think athletes sometimes think about their work a lot differently than salespeople, right? That athletes practice a lot and then they perform at peak performance a few critical times. And a lot of people in business just try and run really hard every single day.
That's right.
And they don't have any schedule or routine. That's one that comes to mind for me. When I say attitude to you, how do you think athletes think differently than most business people or stereotypical business people?
Yeah, so I think there's probably a couple of things that I think about most of all, and I go back to something David Sandler said in an old audio tape, and he said, if you're going to be in sales, you've got to be mentally and emotionally tough. And so one of the things I think about is the ability to draw strength from the struggle. When we get in sales, the outcomes are not guaranteed. And we have, we sometimes have ups and we have downs, and that resilience and that ability to be tough and to push through, I think is something that great athletes have in spades. I had a chance, Mike, I guess it was two years ago this fall, but a client invited me to play golf at Sawgrass, PGA Sawgrass in Florida, and we were playing with a PGA Tour pro. so there's a guy named Jared Wolf, and here's his story. He didn't play in junior tournaments growing up. He couldn't get college coaches to answer his letters. He was on every, the Latin American tour, the Canadian tour, the Corn Ferry tour, and in his first pro event, he four putted from 5 feet on the 18th green. So he really walked off embarrassed, and yet, as a 33-year-old, after 11 years on the tour, on these various tours, he gets his PGA card. And I think that's the spirit. I think salespeople, when you think about coaching yourself, Mike, I think a lot of people out there in the audience, if you were to stop and think, hey, what are some hard things that I've overcome? What are 2 or 3 things where I've had to demonstrate resilience and toughness? And what is it in my life right now, in my business right now, that I can apply that to? And so I think that's the first thing that comes to mind, is just that ability to be emotionally and mentally tough.
Yeah, I think there is a lot to unpack there, but one that I've been sharing a lot recently is that you don't gain confidence through your wins. Sometimes that can even breed imposter syndrome, or you don't learn anything, but you gain confidence by going through difficult times, the losses, and then overcoming them, learning from them, and learning to continue to fight through those types of challenges. And I think that is a big one that you have to learn in sports. You're not going to, make every shot. You're not going to win every game. And the only way to get better is to keep playing. And I think that's a great lesson for sales. And it probably takes us to behavior here as well, because I think some of that is just the way that athletes go about their plan and their goals, and the actions that they take is significantly different, and they might tie together here. So don't feel free to wander between the attitude and behavior bucket, but I think it is significantly different, isn't it?
Yeah, and I do think that for every one of these concepts, you can depending on which way you turn it and which way you look at it, is it an attitude, is it a behavior? But if we talk about behavior, one of the things I think about in the world of athletics is the idea of embracing the grind. Steph Curry had a great quote. He said, "I'll do the same boring drill every single day, thousands of times, so that when I need to do it in a game, it's automatic." And I think a lot of salespeople make a sales call seem more like comedy night or improv night at the comedy club, where they're sort of winging it and they're reacting in the moment. And great performers, that's not how they operate. They are deliberate. They are focused on the vital few. And I've read, Mike, and you may even have seen some of the same data, but depending on who you listen to, folks say that only about a third of the day do salespeople actually engage in selling activities. And I've shared that with clients, and sometimes they think maybe that's a little too high. And so I think what great athletes do and great performers is they focus on the absolute vital things. And I hear a lot of, average performers say things like, well, I don't have time. I know I need to prospect to reach my goals, but I don't have time. And, I don't think time management is really a thing. I think it's more about priority management. I tell my clients, never say I'm too busy, just say it's not a big enough priority. So I think one behavior is embracing the grind and focusing on the vital few things and becoming, creating muscle memory with your process. Does that resonate with you, Mike?
It does. And I think what I heard out of that was that salespeople who are successful like the calls. They even enjoy the losses. They enjoy the challenge, the conversation that they're having. They enjoy the practice. Athletes, you can't play professional athletics if you don't enjoy the practice. because you don't get to play games that often, right?
That's right.
So I love that. And I think that when we enjoy the process, it doesn't really matter on the outcomes. And Steve Buckner made a comment here on LinkedIn as well, that being emotionally detached is important in sales and in sports. That I think if you get yourself all worked up that we got wins and oh my gosh, we're winning, or I'm not this good, or you get beat up on any losses, or I just missed a shot and you overthink it. That's the stuff that all comes through practice and through the experience, that you can't get it in a classroom, and you can't get it by, randomly winging it every day.
Yeah.
You have to do it with intention.
Yeah, and I think about just, what are the things, and of course, if you're a Sandler client, this makes sense, and if you're not a client, it's easy to connect the dots. But things like your 30-second commercial and your upfront contract and being able to manage a pain conversation, like these are things that are pretty much, short of some nuance, but they're pretty much the same every time. And I tell my clients, like, I should be able to call you at 3 a.m. and say, hey, Bob, tell me your upfront contract. And you should just have it in the stage. And I don't know that enough salespeople have it down to that level. And I think to be a champion, to reach our potential, I think that's something that we can all work on.
Yeah, I forget what the famous quote is now, but amateurs practice until they get it right, and professionals practice until they can't get it wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great line for our behaviors and what we need to do to really prepare and do our job well.
Yeah.
Anything else in the attitude or behavior bucket, or should we move on to technique? What do you think?
Well, I think there's probably one area that I would probably put under, I don't know if it goes under attitude or behavior, but I also think that, if I look at my career as an entrepreneur, I had a breakthrough moment about 1.5 years in. And, the pillar that I would think about is thinking about peak performance through self-care. And when I think about self-care, I think about the concept of spirit, mind, and body. And I think one of the things that maybe is so obvious, it's right in front of us, but we sometimes miss it, is that if I'm going to reach my peak, if I'm going to reach my potential, I've got to understand, I've got to spend time building spirit, mind, and body. So spirit, I think about, what's my mission? What's my why? Am I building cathedrals or breaking rocks at the prison? And I think about, like, what's my mindset? Am I focused on today, or am I focused on the past with regret, or am I worried about the future? And, it's a cliche. You hear athletes say, hey, one game at a time, stay in the present, don't get ahead of yourselves. And they're very focused on staying in the here and now, because that's all we control. And then the other thing that I think salespeople miss and business professionals miss, and if I want to be a corporate athlete and perform, I've got to take care of my body. I've got to sweat a little bit every day. I've got to eat right. I've got to sleep. I have a client that when we do our coaching calls, the first question I ask him is, have you been getting enough sleep? Because he is a completely different leader when he's sleep deprived. He's cranky, he's short. I've got a son who's a Division I baseball player, and one of the things that he reports to his coaches on a regular basis is his sleep patterns. And so I think sometimes these things that athletics are really, really focused on right now, we can bring them into our world so we can show up and be our best every day.
I 100% agree with that one. And I think people really underestimate it, especially all three of those, mind, body, and spirit, that you mentioned. That when you're sleep deprived, when you're stressed out, when you're hungry, when you ate too much and you're lethargic after lunch, all of these things vary greatly on how we interact with people and our patients, with clients and
That's right.
other employees. And I think one that I've found really since the pandemic as one of my number one things is when you're in a stressed out state, you can't be creative. Your brain is freaking out saying like, we got to find one right answer that will get us the heck out of this dangerous situation. And you're not relaxed enough to be creative, to be spontaneous, to think around obstacles and find creative solutions to things. And I think that's what salespeople get paid for these days. If there was one right answer, we could have an AI robot do it. We need people who are relaxed, conversational, and can think creatively.
Yeah, and you know what, I guess to add on to that, I think you make a great point. It's you know, we've got big goals, we've got big plans. We're trying to hit stretch goals, and yet I show up, you know, pick a number, 80% of my days, and by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm lethargic and I'm out of energy. And when I get in that state, what do? Well, I'm not going to get out of my comfort zone. Certainly, I'm going to take the path of least resistance. And it's almost like we're trying to reach big full-time goals with almost like part-time energy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think we overestimate too our general workload. So I think there's a lot of people that could do more to take care of themselves and to be prepared to do a full day's work. And I think there's also a lot of people who are doing 8 hours of work that was designed for you to stand in a factory in the early 1900s, not emotional labor of sales and cold calls or Zoom calls all day. It's a completely different animal. And so planning breaks in there and letting, you know, that cognitive overload subside. Hey, even an afternoon nap. A lot of people, you know, laugh at that one, but Winston Churchill and Kennedy and a lot of other really great leaders were just like, man, I need a nap if I'm going to be able to pull this off. Right. And it could be meditation or whatever it is for you, but you know how to manage your mind, body, and spirit. So I love that tip. And I want to get to our technique bucket here.
Yeah.
Strategies, tactics, techniques, any tips?
Yeah, so the last thing I would offer, and of course, you know, there's a bunch of these that we're not talking about today, but I think the one that stands out for me is, you know, if I'm a corporate athlete, if I'm buying into the idea that I'm showing up and performing every day, I understand the concept of deliberate practice, right? So I have I have a specific outcome goal. I'm engaged in practice and role play, and I get feedback from an expert. I have a coach, and I continually stretch myself to not completely out of my comfort zone, but slightly out of my comfort zone. So it's a progressive difficulty that happens. And I do this over time. And I think there's a great anecdote from the sports world that I'll quickly share. You know, Tiger Woods is by most definitions certainly the greatest golfer, or one of the two greatest golfers of our generation. And, you know, Tiger, even at the top of his career, has undergone 5 major swing changes. And you know, he worked with Butch Harmon, a noted coach, for about a decade. And so in 2003, he fires Butch Harmon. He hires Hank Haney, and he changes his swing. And at that time, Tiger had won, I think it was like 8 major championships, which means if he would have never won another one, he would have retired as one of the great. Like, who in the world at the top of their game decides to just change everything? And I think it's a good message for us that, you know, we're not there yet. We've never arrived. No matter how many times I've done it, and no matter how adept I am at my techniques, there's always ways to get to the next level. And so I think the best people among us understand that you're always getting better. You're never staying the same. And so that's one thing that I would think about around the technique that I think athletes do that we can also employ in sales.
Man, really great stuff there. I want to ask you a follow-up question, but
Yeah.
first, I love the flow research stuff that you mentioned. If we're maxed out at 100%, and everybody always says in athletes, dude, give 110%. Well, you can't. You're going to burn
Yeah.
out. And there's been research that shows that if you work more than 60 hours a week for more than 6 weeks in a row, you slow down so much that you produce less than if you had just worked 40 hours the whole time.
Yeah.
Like you're more than 50% slower than what you would have been if you were healthy and rested. And I think the same thing also goes for learning tasks. If the task is so complicated and so hard and so miserable that you're not having fun and you're not learning and you're not growing, you just feel like a failure and you give up. And if a task is too easy, you mentioned being in your comfort zone, we just settle in and we do the same thing over and over again. There's a great research stat that I don't know if I've shared on this podcast yet, but 97% of people, when they're faced with an obstacle, do one of two things: more of what they were currently doing or less of what they were currently doing.
Yeah.
So only 3% of people try something else. And I love that message that you brought, that even if you're at the top of the game, there's going to be times where you need to try something else. And it is this continuous improvement process. And the question I wanted to follow up and have you talk about more is the power of having a coach. I also love this quote that you can't read the label from inside the bottle, that sometimes we don't know what's wrong with us. We don't know why we're not getting further, or why we're not growing. Or Tiger Woods can't change his own swing because he's busy swinging. So he needs videotape. He needs a coach looking at it. Can you talk a little bit more of how having a coach and what a good coach or coaching yourself can even do by watching videotape and stuff that is different?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that, first of all, when it's just me trying to figure it out, I've got some sort of emotional connection. I'm not the third eye looking outside. There are things in my self awareness that I'm just missing, and I think having a coach allows me to progressively and systematically get just a little bit better through feedback. I mean, look, we're either getting better or we're getting worse. There is no staying the same. And I love the concept of I'm not there yet. I think the word yet is one of the most powerful words. I'm not good at selling big accounts yet. And that keeps my mind open that there's more to learn, there's more to achieve, and more skills to gain. So yeah, I think that every top performer that I'm aware of, I think they have a coach. I think they value coaching, and doing this on your own is tough. Now, I will say I need to have enough self-awareness. I'm not going to have a coach by my side all the time. I need to have enough self-awareness for what I'm doing to be able to coach myself some. But I also need this outside person who's willing to hold the mirror up, hold me accountable, and give me feedback. Feedback is the breakfast of champions, right? And
Yeah.
if I'm not getting it, I'm not going to get better.
Awesome. Once again, we're talking with Robin Green, a longtime Sandler trainer in Richmond, Virginia. If you're in the Richmond area, reach out to Robin. If you are not, you can go to Sandler.com, find a local training center, or contact our enterprise team if you have people in more than one location. Now, Robin, I wanted to get to know you a little bit better. So here's my cheesy job interview questions. The first one is, how do you define success at this point in your career?
Yeah, so I think it's changed for sure. But at this point in my career, I think success for me is being able to do things that are in the area of my strength, the things that I'm good at, almost every single day. It's like success is being able to exercise my talents in ways that not just fulfill me, but also benefit my family and benefit others. And so I love the idea that, what I'm good at doing and what I am passionate about is aligned with what I do. And I'll tell you, I've been in the corporate world, spent many years in the corporate world, and sometimes there was a big time misalignment. And those are some long years and some long decades. And so Mike, I've always been a coach at heart. I mentioned in the very beginning, I started my career as a college baseball coach, and it took me a while, but I've been able to find a way to continue to be a coach, just in a little bit of a different arena.
Good answer. Now, on the flip side, was there a failure you are most proud of, or a particularly hard lesson learned you had to figure out in order to be successful?
Yeah, I think, that's a good question. I think, my disc style, for those that are familiar with that, so I am a C style. And I've had many, many failures. And if you know anything about people who are hardwired like me, we can be perfectionists. We can take failure very personally. We can take it very hard. And what it causes us to do is to not try. It causes us to be risk averse. And so I think the thing, if I were to sort of mash up all of my failures, I think the thing that I've learned is that every failure I've ever had has a silver lining, and maybe I haven't completely learned it, but I feel like I'm getting closer to learning the idea that I have to fail in order to succeed. I have to take a risk in order to get a prize. I can't be perfect, and perfect is not really the goal. And so I don't know if that makes sense, but that's really
the old
my
Sandler rule number
relationship
one.
with
You
God.
have to learn how to fail to win. It's a tough one, tough lesson to learn too. And now, do you have a favorite Sandler rule, quote, or concept?
Well, I guess with that, I would have to say the Sandler rule that says a life without risk is a life without growth. And I think about that a lot, and I use it in my decision-making process a lot. And it's something that has really helped me.
Awesome. Any other final thoughts on how to succeed at being a corporate athlete, or anything I should have asked you that I missed?
No, I just think the idea is that growth starts from within, right? So if I think about the attitude part of this, I've got to grow on the inside before it starts showing up on the outside. And then I want to find joy in the grind. I want to embrace the idea of a little bit, a lot. And then when it comes to technique, I can always be better. I should always be assessing myself and getting feedback from others, and truly trying to stretch on a regular and routine basis. And I think if you do that, you're going to reach whatever your potential is, and you're going to show up, and you're going to do your best on a regular and consistent basis.
Robin, you nailed it. Thanks for being on the show again. Robin Green, Sandler trainer from Richmond, and I've been Mike Monty, your host, as Sandler, Director of Community Engagement. Please connect with me on LinkedIn or send me an email. Let me know if you listen to this, if you like it, if you have any suggestions for future guests. Always love that. For more information on Sandler, go to sandler.com. You can find a local training location, or as I mentioned, the enterprise team if you have more than one location, or there's just another ton of free resources. So we've got videos on YouTube. We've got over 600 podcasts like this one, and a ton of additional white papers, webinars, and cool events and more. Just go to sandler.com. And as always, whatever you are, be a good one. That's what I always say. We'll see you next time.